one NATO country openly threatening to take territory from another NATO country by force. This is not a movie. This is not history. This is happening now. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and today I want to talk to you about Greenland. Not ice, not snow, but power. When a US president says America needs Greenland and refuses to rule out force, we cross a dangerous line, because this is not just about an island. It is about whether borders still matter, whether alliances still mean anything, whether international law still holds. Europe reacted with rare unity. Greenland's people reacted with fear. And NATO faced a question it was never built to answer. What happens when the threat comes from inside? If that question makes you uneasy, it should. Because Greenland is not the story. It is the warning. To understand why this matters so deeply, we need to step back and define the real problem first. Let's slow this down and name the problem clearly. This is not a dispute over Greenland's resources. Not really. And not a misunderstanding between allies. This is about power and how it is being redefined. For decades, the West claimed something radical, that borders are sacred, that sovereignty is non-negotiable. That force is replaced by rules. NATO was built on that promise. So was the post-World War II order. But when the most powerful member of that system suggests it can absorb territory because it is needed for security, the logic shifts. Security becomes a justification. Power becomes permission. European leaders responded quickly, not out of symbolism, but out of alarm, because if this principle breaks once, it doesn't stop at Greenland. The real question is not whether the US can take Greenland. It is whether anyone can stop this way of thinking from spreading. To answer that, we need to understand where it comes from. And that takes us backward into history. To understand this moment, we have to go back, not to the Cold War, but further to a time when power defined borders and great nations believed influence was a right. In 1823, the United States declared the Monroe Doctrine, a simple idea: the Western Hemisphere would be America's sphere. For generations, that mindset never fully disappeared. It went quiet, but it never vanished. After World War II, something changed. The US helped build a system of rules, institutions, alliance, force was restrained, sovereignty mattered. NATO was born from that belief. But systems age and power tests limits. When the US intervened militarily in Venezuela and spoke openly about running another country, old instincts resurfaced. Soon after, Greenland entered the conversation, not as a partner, but as an asset. Security concerns, strategic location, critical minerals. History teaches us this pattern. When power feels threatened, it reaches backward for familiar tools. And that brings us to the first real rupture, the moment when fear turned into shock. Then came the shock, not in the Arctic, but thousands of miles away. US forces entered Venezuela. Elite troops, a swift operation. The goal was clear: seize the sitting president, bring him to New York, charge him with crimes. Afterwards, the language was chilling. The United States would run Venezuela for an unspecified period of time. And then something else happened. The past was officially revived. The administration spoke openly about returning to an 1823 mindset, a world of spheres, a world of dominance. Within days, Greenland reappeared, not as theory, as intent. A map surfaced online, Greenland in American colors, one word beneath it: soon. If you are a European ally, this is not rhetoric. It is a warning. Because when force is normalized once, it lowers the barrier everywhere. This was the first real crisis. not because troops landed in Greenland, but because a line was crossed. And once crossed, it becomes easier the next time to see why we need to look beneath the surface at the system driving these decisions. To understand what's really happening, we have to look beneath the headlines. This is not about Greenland itself. It is about how power sees the world. Inside this logic, alliances are not equal partnerships. They are hierarchies. Protection flows downward, decisions flow upward. In that system, NATO is not a community. It is a structure led by one center of gravity. When US officials say, America is the power of NATO, they are revealing something important. Security becomes ownership. Protection becomes entitlement. Greenland, in this view, is not a society, not a people, but a strategic platform, Arctic access, minerals, geographic control. International law becomes conditional. Sovereignty becomes negotiable. And here is the danger. If the rules apply only when they are convenient, then they are no longer rules. They are preferences. This is the hidden mechanism, not chaos, but a system quietly reverting to an older logic of dominance. And once that logic is accepted, it doesn't stop with Greenland. The pressure builds, the stakes rise. And that leads us to the second, deeper crisis. Then came the second crisis, quieter but more dangerous. A senior US official stated it plainly. Greenland, he said, should be part of the United States. Not a proposal, not a discussion. A position, when asked about force, the answer was evasive, almost dismissive. Nobody's going to fight the US over Greenland. That sentence matters because it assumes something profound. That power decides outcomes. That resistance is irrelevant. That consent is optional. At that moment, the issue moved beyond rhetoric. European leaders heard it. So did Denmark. So did Greenland. This was no longer speculation. It was doctrine taking shape in real time. And NATO faced an impossible contradiction. An alliance designed to defend members from external threats was now confronting pressure from its strongest internal one. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was structural, and when structures bend too far, they either reform or they break. The consequences of that strain are not abstract. They land somewhere specific on people, on lives, on the ground. That is where we go next. Now, let's shift perspective from governments to people, from strategy to daily life. If you live in Greenland, this is not a geopolitical debate. It is personal. You hear powerful leaders talk about your land as if it were empty, as if it were unclaimed, as if you were not there. But you are there. You have always been. You wake up wondering what comes next. Not in 10 years, but tomorrow. Will decisions be made without you, about you, over you? One young Inuit man said, it was terrifying to hear world leaders laugh while discussing his home. That fear is rational because history teaches a hard lesson. When powerful nations speak this way, people like you are usually the last to be consulted. This is where geopolitics becomes human, where abstract power turns into anxiety. If you believe borders matter, if you believe consent matters, if you believe people are not assets, this is the moment to pay attention. Because when fear reaches ordinary lives, the system is already cracking. And what happens next will not stay local. It never does. This is no longer just a European issue. It is a global signal. When borders are questioned in the Arctic, they are questioned everywhere. Allies around the world are watching, not what the US says, but what it is willing to do, because if sovereignty can be bent inside NATO, it can be bent outside it. International law depends on precedent. and precedent travels fast. One exception becomes an argument. One justification becomes a template. Security, resources, strategic necessity. These words echo far beyond Greenland. In Asia, in the Middle East, in contested regions where power already presses against borders, the European response mattered for this reason. It was not only about Denmark, it was about drawing a line, saying that even close allies do not get to redraw the map. But credibility is fragile. If the world's strongest democracy treats borders as flexible, others will follow. Not because they agree, but because they can. This is how global order erodes. Not with explosions, but with permissions. And once that erosion begins, the future narrows quickly. Which brings us to the question that now defines everything. Where does this lead? So let's look ahead. Carefully, honestly, there are three possible futures. The first is restraint. In this scenario, pressure works. Allies push back. Rules are reaffirmed. Greenland's status is respected. Security is pursued collectively through NATO, through consent, through law. The system bends, but it holds. The second future is ambiguity. The language softens, the threats fade, but the idea remains: no invasion, no annexation, just constant pressure. Diplomacy becomes leverage. Security becomes bargaining power. Borders stay in place, but trust erodes. And then there is the third future, the dangerous one, where force becomes thinkable again, where precedent is ignored, where power decides, not just in Greenland, but elsewhere. Once that door opens, it rarely closes. History shows this clearly. Systems don't collapse overnight. They unravel quietly, incrementally, until one day everyone realizes the rules are gone. The future, then, is not about Greenland alone. It is about which logic wins, rules or power. And that choice brings us to the final insight. Here is the deeper truth. Greenland is not the prize. It is the test, a test of whether the world still believes that power must obey rules, or whether rules now exist only at the convenience of power. Every international system rests on a simple idea. That strength comes with restraint. That leadership means limits. When that idea fades, order doesn't disappear instantly. It erodes slowly, quietly, until fear replaces trust. This moment asks something of you, not as a policymaker, but as a citizen of the world. Pay attention to the language leaders use, because language reveals intention long before action does. If you believe borders matter, if you believe consent matters, if you believe alliances are more than tools, then this story matters. Not because Greenland may change hands, but because the rules may change meaning. And once that happens, no country is truly small, and no border is truly safe. If this analysis helped you see the world more clearly, share it, continue the conversation, and stay with me. Because the next chapter of global power is already being written.